And welcome to today's Business Studies Quarter 3 revision session. My name is Mr. de Klerk, and with me in studio I have Mr. Van Zyl. Good afternoon, Mr. Van Zyl.
Afternoon, Mr. de Klerk. Good to be here.
Yeah. Okay, grade 12s. So the purpose of our revision session today is to work through all the topics that we covered in term 3 of your grade 12 year. And the other purpose of today is to work through those topics and identify all the areas where the grade 12s found the work a bit challenging in the end of year grade 12 papers. So we're going to be working through those topics, working through those specific questions, and then also be advising you as to how to analyze the question and answer the question and show you how the questions are marked, because you need to use that in your preparation for the exams as well. So let's take a closer look at what we will be covering in today's session. So firstly, we're going to be looking at, or just to remind you of the different topics that will be covered in papers 1 and papers 2. And then specifically with the topics for today, we're going to be looking at human rights, inclusivity and environmental issues, social responsibility, corporate social responsibility, as well as corporate social investment, presentation of information and data response, forms of ownership and the impact on the business. And if we have some time at the end, we will do some revision on as to how to answer the essay questions. Okay, grade 12s. So just to remind you, and I'm sure your teachers have gone through this process with you, and to remind you as to how the topics have been divided according to the two papers. So if we can take a quick look at the slide, we'll see that paper 1 consists of business environments and business operations. So to remind you that only those topics under business environments and business operations will be asked in paper 1. And then in paper 2, it's going to be business ventures and business roles. So you need to make sure that in your preparation, you know which topics belong firstly to business environments and business operations, and then know that those topics will be in paper 1. Then you have to remind yourself as to what topics fall under business ventures and business roles, and also then remind yourself again that those fall under paper 2. So you need to make sure that you are preparing the correct work for the correct paper. Then also I'm sure your teachers have reminded you with the format of the exam paper, where question 1 will be 15 questions with 2 marks, or for 2 marks each. So that's a total of 30 marks. Then in section B, for paper 1, it's going to be business environments as question 2. So only topics that fall under business environments will be asked in question 2. Only topics that fall under business operations will be asked in question 3. And then in question 4, it's going to be a combination question where 20 marks will be on business environments and 20 marks will be on business operations. Then in section C, you're going to have 2 optional essay questions. Question 5 will be on one of the topics that fall under business environments, and question 6 will be on one of the topics that fall under business operations. So you only obviously need to answer one of those 2 essay questions there. Then for paper 2, the same format for section A, 15 questions in the form of multiple choice questions, choosing the correct answer, matching columns, 2 marks each, which means section A will be worth 30 marks. Section B, question 2 now will only be on business ventures. So all the topics that fall under business ventures will only form part of question 2. Business roles will form, or all the topics under business roles will fall under question 3. And then again, question 4 will be a combination question where 20 marks will be on business ventures and 20 marks will be on business roles. And section C, again, 2 essay questions, of which you have to do one of those 2 questions. Question 5 will be a topic under business ventures, and question 6 will be a topic under business roles. Okay, so there you have it, grade 12s. That's just a reminder, but I'm sure your teachers have gone through this process with you and that you are well familiar with this format of the question papers as well. Then, like I said at the beginning, one of the purposes of today's revision session is to also teach you how the marks are allocated. So I know we've done this before in our previous sessions, but we're quickly going to go through the action verbs that we use in the questions to make sure that you understand how you need to answer the various questions. Okay, so if you look at the first slide over there, when you see this action verb, give, identify, list, mention, name, and state, you're only going to state, give, identify, list, mention, or state the answer, and that's going to be 1 mark that will be awarded for those types of questions. So whenever you see these verbs, only 1 mark will be awarded for either your word or your statement or your phrase that you are giving. Then for these action verbs where you see classify, name, suggest, advise, propose, define, outline, recommend, motivate, and state, 2 marks are allocated at the end of the statement. Okay, so the marks are not split in these cases. When you see these verbs, you're going to make 1 complete statement, and then the 2 marks will be added at the end of each of the statements that you make. And then finally, when you see these action verbs in the questions, 2 marks will be split. 1 mark for the statement that you make, and the second mark for clarifying your statement. So you're going to have to make a statement where you're going to firstly say what the answer is. So you make your statement, and then you clarify the statement to get the second mark. So when you see the action verbs describe, explain, distinguish, discuss, analyze, elaborate, showing impact, applying a technique, evaluate, differentiate, compare, tabulate, and justify, then you need to know that these marks are going to be split. Then you're going to have your statement, and you're going to have to clarify the statement. And as we go through our session today, you will see that we are going to highlight what the action verbs are in the question and how the marks will be allocated. So you're going to see us applying these action verbs in what we are doing in today's revision lesson to make sure that you know when 1 mark is awarded, when 2 marks are awarded at the end of the statement, or when the 2 marks are split, 1 mark for making the statement and second mark for clarifying the statement. Right, grade 12s, in your workbook on page 3 and 4, there is a pre-test, and the best advice is to first answer these questions as best as you can before you've gone through all the work, and then come back and answer or check your answers as we go through. So when you're watching this video, if you're in a position to do so, you pause at this stage, answer all the questions to the best of your ability, and then watch all the topics, or watch us as we go through all the topics and compare your answers to the answers that we show in our presentation. Okay, grade 12, so we're going to jump straight into our first topic for today, which is going to be human rights, inclusivity, and environmental issues. Now, the first thing that we need to know here is we actually need to understand these terms. So you need to understand what we talk about when we mean human rights. You need to understand what we are talking about when we say inclusivity. You need to understand what we're talking about when we say environmental issues. And there's quite easy descriptions for these. You can see that human rights are rights that everybody must enjoy by the mere fact that they are human beings. So grade 12s, just by being alive, by being a human being, these human rights are awarded to you. Everybody must have these rights just by being a human being. And then inclusivity means that everybody is included. We should not have anybody that is excluded because of differences. Now, we know that we have lots of differences amongst our people in South Africa. So when we are in the working environment, we need to make sure that we take into account all these differences so that we do not discriminate or exclude anybody. We rather want to include people. We don't want to exclude people based on their abilities, their gender, their race, their disabilities, their cultures, their religions, etc. So we need to be aware of all the differences so that we can be inclusive in our business to make sure that everybody feels included and welcome in the workplace. And then the last one is the environmental issues, and that is just preserving a clean and safe and sustainable environment, which means that we will be able to then perform our task to the best of our ability. So that is the 3 terms. Now, coming back to human rights. So we're going to be looking at these 3 terms: human rights, inclusivity, as well as the environmental issues. So we're firstly going to be looking at the human rights, and let's quickly see what your human rights are. So remember, based on the mere fact that you have been born and that you are alive, you enjoy these rights. These rights are awarded to you just by being alive. So you have the right to privacy, you have the right to freedom of speech, you have the right to information that you need to know, you have the right to be treated with dignity and respect, you have the right to safety and security, and you have the right to equity as well. So these are all the human rights. And when it comes to questions on human rights, there are certain ways that these questions are asked. So let's see how these questions are asked. So firstly, you could just be asked to list or name the different human rights, in which case you will just have to list these human rights. So you just write the word privacy, freedom of speech, information, dignity, safety and security, and equity. So when they ask you to just list it, look at the question, because the question will be specific. It will say list 1 or list 2 or list 3 or list 6, and then you just need to list those many human rights. So it's just writing it down. You're not going to explain anything. Just read the question carefully to make sure that you understand that, do I need to list 1 or 2 or 3, because the mark allocation will also guide you there. Then the next way the question could be asked is you could be asked to identify the human rights from a scenario or a statement. Now, this is the more common way that it is asked. So they will give you a scenario or a statement, and then they will ask you to identify the human rights that were referred to by the scenario or the statement. Right? And in that case, you will probably get 2 marks for identifying the correct human right in that particular scenario or that statement. And then the third way that they could ask the question is that you could be asked how a business can deal with specific human rights in the workplace. Okay? So when it comes to this particular question, you could be asked how to deal with specific human rights in the workplace. Here, you're going to need a bit of explanation. So in the first 2 ways that the question could be asked, you're normally going to either just list it or identify it. But now in the third way, where you are asked how the business can deal with the specific human rights, you're going to have to explain your answers in this case. And this is what we are going to be looking at now, because often in the past papers, even when the question says, how can a business deal with human rights in the workplace? Some learners will just list it by making sure there's equity, by making sure that there is safety and security, by making sure that there is information. Okay, so you need to be more specific when it comes to that. So let's take a look at how that question should be asked. So the question is, recommend ways in which a business can deal with the human rights. So the key thing here is that that verb in the question is recommend. So in our list of action verbs we showed at the beginning, recommend would be one of those verbs where the 2 marks are allocated at the end of the statement. So here you need to look at the question and you need to look at the mark allocation, because the mark allocation will guide you as to how many recommendations you have to make. Okay, so we're going to look at each of the human rights, and I'm going to give you a scenario where, let's say the question says, recommend 2 ways in which a business can deal with human rights, which means you're going to have to give 2 recommendations. Okay, so let's have a look at the slide. So we're looking at privacy first. So if the question says recommend 2 ways a business can deal with privacy, then your first bullet point, for example, would be the business should not provide personal information about the employees to anyone else. And you can see the 2 marks have been awarded at the end of the statement there. The second bullet point, information about employees who have disclosed their HIV/AIDS status must be kept confidential. Those are just 2 examples, grade 12s. There are more examples in your core notes, but what we're trying to get to is look at the mark allocation when the question is asked, and that will guide you as to how many recommendations you will have to make. So if it is 2 marks, it's 1 recommendation. If it is 4 marks, it's 2 recommendations. If it's 6 marks, it's 3 recommendations, and so on. So look at the mark allocation divided by 2, and that's how many recommendations that you have to have. But you must still have full sentences. Don't write 1-word or 2-word statements. It must be full statements, because the marks are awarded for the statement. If it's not full, we don't give half marks, so you won't get 1 out of the 2 marks. It must be the full statement to get the 2 marks there.
Mr. De Klerk, maybe I would like to just say something here. When it's a question like recommend, it doesn't require a statement and a qualifier, because the 2 marks go at the end. What the marker will be looking for is the essence of what you are saying. So, for instance, the business should not provide personal information about employees to anyone else. That first part of the sentence should be enough to give you your 2 marks. The business should not provide personal information about employees. The second one says, for instance, freedom of speech. Business should not allow open communication channels, or should allow, between management and employees. Between management and employees is not really the essence of what the statement is. So it doesn't have to be in so much detail as you would give an explain or a discuss type of question. The second way that this question is sometimes asked is you had to identify those human rights issues from a statement, and then the second follow-on question says make recommendations on how to deal with each of the ones that you've identified. Now guys, what people then sometimes make a mistake is they just start making recommendations, but it must be clearly linked to the ones that you've identified. So the best way to do this is to say, for instance, ways to deal with privacy, and then you make your recommendations, ways to deal with freedom of speech, so that the marker knows that you are linking it to the ones that you have identified.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Van Zyl. All right, let's take a look at the other human rights and just look at the recommendations there. I'm going to go through it quickly because these are all in your core notes. We just want you to see how the marks are awarded. So with dignity, businesses must treat all employees with dignity and respect. That is actually enough to get your 2 marks already. So you don't need to say regardless of their socioeconomic issues. They must treat employees with dignity and respect. Then the second bullet point, they should not force workers to do embarrassing or degrading work. And your 2 marks will be awarded there. Then for equity, businesses must give equal opportunities and not discriminate against anybody on the basis of gender, race, etc. So again, the 2 marks will be enough if you say business must give equal opportunities to everybody in the business. You don't have to say irrespective of all the gender, race, religion, etc. And then equal pay for equal work is the other bullet point for equity there. And then the last 2 is information, and the recommendations could be workers should have access to information, right? So whatever information is relevant for them to know, they should have access to that, and employers should be informed as new information becomes available, and the 2 marks will be awarded at the end of the statement there. And the last one, with regards to safety and security, the business must ensure that employees receive all necessary protective equipment or protective clothing. Okay, so for that particular one, you could actually say the business must make sure that there's necessary protective equipment, and then your second statement could also be the business must ensure that there is the necessary protective clothing. So you can actually use clothing and equipment as separate points in there, and that will also be 2 marks for each of those statements there. And the last one is there that the business must take precautionary measures to ensure that employees' belongings are safe in the workplace. Okay, grade 12, so those are your human rights. Remember the 3 ways that you can be asked, either to list or identify them, or you can be given a scenario and then be asked to list and identify them, or you can be given the question as to how or what recommendations you can make to the business to make sure that the human rights are protected. And as Mr. Van Zyl alluded to, usually that will all be together. You'll be given a statement or a scenario. They will then ask you to identify the human right. They'll ask you to maybe quote a statement to back up your identification of the human right, and then ask for your recommendations. And there is an example at the end, which we will look at that briefly then. Okay, then after human rights, you'll also be asked about what your social rights are. Okay, so what are your social rights? The rights to skills training, unemployment protection, healthcare services, access to clean water, participating in social events. So these are all your social rights as a person, and these also need to be protected by the business. So what are the common questions again? You could again just be asked to list or name these social rights, in which case it's going to be 1 mark for each item that you list. And again, you look at your mark allocation to guide you, or you look at the question that might say 3 or 4 or 2. Then you could be asked to identify the social rights from a scenario, so in the same way that you could be asked for the human rights. And then finally, you could be asked how a business can promote the social rights in the workplace. So we're going to quickly look at how you can promote the social rights in the workplace. Okay, so these are recommendations to what businesses can do. And again, try to stick to the recommendations that's been given to you in your core notes, because those are what will be on the marking guidelines at the end of the year. So there is a case where if you give a recommendation that is not on the marking guideline, you may be awarded that mark, but it may be very difficult for you to do so. So when you prepare what's in your core notes, because everything that's in your core notes will also be on the marking memorandum that the markers get at the end of the year, and that will avoid any confusion. Because if you put something on in your answer that's not on the marking memorandum, it has to go through a channel to make sure then that you get that mark. So it might be a bit more difficult. So don't try and learn what's in your core notes. Do not be in the situation where you might lose marks for not having something that has been on the core notes, so that's in the marking memorandum. Okay, so let's look at ways that the businesses can promote social rights in the workplace. And again, the action verb is recommend, so 2 marks are awarded at the end. So I would say learn 2 or 3, maybe at most 4. You don't have to learn everything. Just make sure you know at least 2 or 3 of these social rights and what the businesses can do. So businesses should ensure that employees have access to clean water, encourage employees or provide opportunities for skills training, register workers with the UIF to provide adequate protection in the event of unemployment or illness. So just registering the workers with the UIF to provide adequate protection is enough to get those 2 marks there. Or even just registering workers with the UIF will be enough to get the 2 workers. And encourage employees to participate in special events, for example, World AIDS Day or Heritage Day that's coming up. It could be those events that you encourage your employees to participate in, and provide healthcare services by establishing clinics. Or you can just say provide healthcare services. That will also be enough to get the marks there. So a trick that you can use here is to look at the social rights and just say the business must provide skills training, the business must provide healthcare service, the business must provide access to clean water. Okay, now with healthcare service, we can't say the business must provide healthcare services, but the business must provide access to healthcare services, maybe through taking employees to clinics if they get injured, or providing medical aid as a benefit in the workplace. Okay, so if you look at that slide again, business must encourage people to participate in special events. So if you learn what their social rights are, your recommendations then will just be the business must provide or give access to. And then you just put in the social rights and you will get the 2 marks for that particular recommendation there. Okay, then we come to cultural rights. So another common question is recommend ways that a business can promote cultural rights in the workplace. Okay, and our recommendations here are providing an environment in which employees feel free to use their own language when interacting with others, encourage employees to participate in cultural activities. Regular cultural information sessions will help employees to respect each other's culture in the workplace. Making provision for different cultures, such as food that's served in the canteen or entertainment that you have at the staff functions. So, for example, if you have people of the Muslim faith, you must make sure that you have food that is halal, to make sure that you are respecting their culture and respecting their religion in that event. And you must also employ people with different cultural backgrounds. Okay, so there you have different recommendations. When it comes to culture's got to do with language, it's got to do with religion, it's got to do with cultural events, etc. So your recommendations could all be around that. Then another common question with regards to the implication of equality, respect, and dignity on a business. Okay, so here, grade 12s, you'll see you have the action verb here is explain the implications of equality, respect, and dignity on a business. And again, your mark allocation will guide you here, but because the action verb is explain, you're going to have to make a statement, and then you're going to have to clarify your statement. So if we look at the first bullet point here, it says businesses should treat all their employees equally. So you get your first mark for saying we must treat everybody equally. The second mark for clarifying it by saying regardless of their race, age, gender, sexual orientation, disability, etc. And you get your second mark of that. So it's the first mark for saying treat everybody equally. Second mark for saying regardless of what the difference is. And it could be age, gender, sexual orientation, disability, and so on. Then all workers should have access to equal opportunities. So you get your first mark for saying that's your statement. We must all have access to equal opportunities, positions, and resources in the business. Okay, so everybody must have access to all the resources, all the opportunities in the business. Employers and employees need to comply with legislation. First mark for saying that. Second mark for clarifying what legislation are we talking about, with the legislation with regard to equal opportunities, human rights, and as well as human rights in the workplace. Then the fourth bullet point there, businesses should develop equity programs or equity programs to promote strategies to ensure that all employees are treated equally, regardless of status, rank, and power. So the first mark there will be awarded for saying we must develop equity programs or we must promote strategies. And what strategies are we trying to promote? Strategies to ensure that people are treated equally regardless of their status, rank, or power they have in the business. And then the second last bullet point there, the mission statement. So one mark for saying the mission statement, because that's the document that you are referring to, should include values of equality and respect. So you are getting the second mark for saying include values of equality and respect. And the last bullet point there is training information businesses or training information business policies should include issues such as diversity, discrimination, and harassment. So we're saying the training that you receive, the information you receive, as well as all business policies should all include issues such as diversity, discrimination, and harassment. That's to make sure that everybody feels inclusive or included in the business, to make sure there's no discrimination, and so on. Okay, so the last aspect we're going to look at is the diversity issues in the workplace. So when we're looking at diversity issues in the workplace, we're saying we are intentionally employing a workforce that's comprised of individuals of varying gender, religion, race, age, ethnicity, sexual orientation, education, and other attributes. So we're looking at all aspects of diversity where everybody is different, and we are saying as a company, we are going to make sure that we employ people that represent all the differences in the workplace. Why do we want to do that? Because we want to be an inclusive company. We don't want to discriminate. We don't want to exclude anybody based on whatever their differences are. So we want to make sure as a company, these are the differences that exist in our country, so our business needs to represent that as well. So we're going to include people of different gender, different races, different age, different cultures, different religions, and so on. But what's important for you grade 12s is to know what the different diversity issues are that businesses need to consider in their day-to-day operations. So the different diversities are poverty, race, gender, language, age, religion, disability, and inequality. So those are the ones that are highlighted in the core notes. So these are the ones that you need to know in preparation for your end of year exams. So you must again understand how this question can be asked. So again, the question can either be list 4 or 3 or 2, however many marks they're looking for, list a number of diversity issues, or it can be given to you in a scenario where there's a story that's been told and they're going to say identify the diversity issues that exist in the scenario, and then it's either going to be one of poverty, race, gender, language, age, religion, disability, or inequality. Okay, and then the third way the question could be asked is, the third way is you could be asked how a business can deal with specific diversity issues in the workplace. So how are you going to deal with poverty? How are you going to deal with age? How are you going to deal with gender in the workplace? So you could be asked how to deal specifically with a particular diversity issue. And finally, you could be asked to explain the benefits of a diverse workforce. So we're going to look at the third and the fourth bullet point there, where you are asked how to deal with specific diversity issues in the workplace, and how you could and also how you can explain the benefits of a diverse workforce. Okay, so when it comes to explaining the benefits of a diverse workforce, okay, so here we're talking about the advantages of a diverse workforce, what it brings into the business. And again, look at your mark allocation when you are asked this question, because your mark allocation will guide you as to how many statements and clarifiers you need to have. So remember, it says explain the benefits of a diverse workforce. So your action verb there is explain. So you're going to have to make your statement and then clarify your statement. And you can see how the marks have been split here So let's take a look at them quickly. Diversity in the workplace improves morale and motivation. Okay, so 1 mark for saying it improves morale, 1 mark for saying it improves motivation. Employees demonstrate greater loyalty to the business. Why? Because they feel respected, accepted, included, and understood. A diversified workforce can give a business a competitive advantage. Why can it give a competitive advantage? Because you can render a better service because you have a diverse workforce. The 4th one there, being respectful of differences, demonstrating diversity makes good business sense and improves profitability. And the last one there, diverse businesses ensure that its policies, practices empower every employee. So you're saying a diverse business ensures that you're empowering all the employees to perform to their full potential. Okay, grade 12s. Before we look at a question, when it comes to how a business can promote the different diversity issues in the workplace, again, look at the diversity issues. So if you look at the list of diversity issues over there, if it asks what can the business do to help people in poverty, it will normally be one of those recommend or suggest questions. Then again, learn all these different diversity issues and say what can the business do to promote poverty, or not to promote poverty, but rather to combat poverty. And what businesses could do there is could have training programs to alleviate poverty. That will fall under CSR and CSI that we'll look at a bit later. A business could employ people who come from impoverished backgrounds. By doing that, they could then address the issue of poverty by giving that person a job so they can improve their standard of living and so on. What can businesses do with regards to gender? Try to make sure that we are employing people of different genders, employing women and men equally and giving them equal opportunities to apply for position in the workplace. What can we do about language? We can encourage people to use their language when they are communicating with each other, but it's important there that the business will have its own medium of communication. So, for example, all official communication in the business might be in English, but when you are communicating to your colleagues or your friends in the workplace, you can obviously then we should encourage you to use your own language because you might understand each other better when using your own language. But all official communication might still be in what the business's main language is. Okay? So look at the diversity issues and see what recommendations you come up with. There are quite a few recommendations in your core notes as to what businesses can do to ensure that we are addressing these diversity issues. So grade 12, we're quickly going to look at one question, and this is what Mr. Van Zyl alluded to earlier, where there's a scenario and they ask you to identify the issue. They ask you to get a quote to back up what you have identified and then make a recommendation. So what's important here is you have to read the scenario. So it says the management of Neo Trading Enterprise has promoted Mr. Tom as a senior manager, even though Mrs. Jane is more qualified than him. Some employees are not allowed to observe their religious practices, and NTE prefer young employees to come up with new ideas rather than old employees. Okay? Then look at what the question wants. Identify 3 diversity issues. Quote from the scenario, and that's for 9 marks. Okay, so you're going to get 2 marks for identifying each of the diversity issues. So that will give you 6 marks and 1 mark for the quote. And then advise NTE on ways in which they can deal with each of the diversity issues. So there you can see the marks are 12 marks. There are 3 issues that you are dealing with. So you're going to have to give 2 recommendations for each of the diversity issues over there. Okay? And then important there, it says use the table below to present your answer. Now grade 12, sometimes they will say redraw the table. And then you have to redraw the table and you put your answers in those table there as well. So when they give you a table like this, use the table, redraw it in your answer book, and then put the answers in, because it becomes a lot easier for you to monitor what you are talking about, and also for the person marking it becomes a bit easier. So
Mr. de Klerk,
yeah.
Maybe on that point quickly, you are actually writing a paper for the marker. The easier that you can make it for the marker to spot your marks is in your own benefit. If you mark at the end of the year, it is actually very important to note that these guys are marking for 14 days straight, and they are coming in the morning 8 o'clock and they're leaving in the evenings 9 o'clock. They could be tired when they pick up your paper. It is, if it's easier and the marks are already laid out there, then it's easier for the marker to spot it. That is also why Mr. de Klerk has said, try to stick to the given answers in your core content. We are now not dealing really with critical thinking here. We are dealing with a summative assessment at the end of the year. If you can get this right, to get the answers or the marks allocated to you, it's easier to stick to the ones that's in the core content given already.
Okay, thank you very much. So let's quickly answer these questions before we move on to our next topic. Okay, so identify 3 diversity issues. And normally you'll see there'll be, if they're looking for 3 issues, there'll be 3 or 4 sentences, and each sentence will actually contain an issue. So the first one is the management of neo-trading enterprises promoted Mr. Tom as a senior manager, even though Mrs. Jane is more qualified. So now we're assuming that Tom and Jane is male and female. So that first issue there is going to be gender. In the next sentence, some employers are not allowed to observe their religious practices. So the diversity issue there is religion. And then the last one is NTE prefers young employees to come up with new ideas rather than old employees. So that's going to be age as the diversity issue that is going to be identified there. So you can see there's 3 sentences, which means each sentence contains a diversity issue. And when you quote, you can actually just write the whole sentence down, because you're going to then make it easier to make sure that you get that mark for quoting it. So 2 marks for naming the issue, 1 mark for quoting it. And then when it comes to your recommendation, so you can see we've redrawn the table, you can come up with the recommendations that, and again, these recommendations are in the core content. You can actually learn them. So you can then give your recommendation for gender. So you can see we've written down the full sentences there for the quote, and then the recommendations there. NTE should base their decision on the skills of the employee rather than their gender. NTE should promote men and women in management positions equally. Right? For religion, allow employees to practice their religious practices. Educate other staff on religious practices to encourage understanding. And the last one with age, we need to involve all people irrespective of their age. And NTE must also make sure that they employ people of different ages over there.
Mr. de Klerk, I also want to just reiterate the importance of quoting the entire sentence. Now, they say to us at the end of the year, they are looking for the essence of the sentence. Now, I've seen it many, many times. People start, instead of quoting, writing their own interpretation down. Now, you are then actually not answering the question. The answering of the question lies in the quote. So rather write the full sentence down. You don't need the those marks things. That you don't need. But if you can use it word for word, verbatim, from the case study, that is actually what they're looking for.
Okay, so whenever you quote, just look at the number of quotes they're looking for. Most likely, if they're looking for 3 quotes, there's going to be 3 sentences in the statement. Okay, so then last thing we're going to look at is environmental issues and common mistakes here. So these are 2 questions that are asked at the end of the year. Explain the responsibility of employers in promoting human health and safety in the workplace, and explain the responsibilities of employees in promoting human health and safety in the workplace. So the problem here is not that the grade 12s haven't studied this work, is that you're not reading the question correctly. So make sure you're reading the question. If you look at the question, you'll see the key difference there is highlighted. The first one is employers, so that's the business, and the second one is employees, which is the workers in the business. So make sure that you are reading the questions carefully to make sure that you are answering the correct question, because the common mistake is, like I said, is not you not studying the work. The common mistake is misinterpreting the question. So if it's asking you about employees, sometimes people write about the employers. If they're asking about the employers, sometimes people are writing about the employees. So make sure that you get the key concepts clear and you understand what the question is that you are asking. And the answers for that is on page 122 in the core notes. They're quite simple to understand, so we're not going to go through that. And the last common mistake is elaborate on the role of health and safety representative in protecting the workplace environment, and recommend or suggest strategies that the businesses may use to protect the environment and promote the human health. So here people often always come from the perspective of the health and safety representative. So when people read this question, they always think health and safety is responsible for everything. Remember, the health and safety representative is a person who has a role and a duty to perform in the business, but the business must provide everything. And so you must make sure here that you understand, are we talking about the role of the health and safety representative, or are we talking about the strategies that the business must use to protect the environment? Because that is where people get this question confused.
Mr. de Klerk, sorry, I'm interrupting now all the time. On that health and safety representative, as Mr. de Klerk said, and I just want to reiterate that point, the health and safety representative is an employee that was elected by other employees. He does not have the ability to provide anything. He can recommend to management that there's maybe an error in the process. He can make recommendations, but he cannot provide. What the common mistake is that people make, they will say he needs to provide safety clothing. He doesn't provide safety clothing at all. That is the business that provides. He needs to ensure that safety clothing has been provided. There's a big difference between ensure that safety clothing is being provided and providing safety clothing. So that is the message that you need to
So make
take.
sure, are you talking about the health and safety officer or representative, or the workplace? So the business must provide it, and the health and safety representative must make sure that you are using it.
Exactly.
To make sure that you are keeping the workplace safe.
Yes.
Okay, grade 12s, we're going to go for a quick break where you can stretch your legs. And when we come back, Mr. Van Zyl will be taking you through the next section, which will be on corporate social responsibility and corporate social investment. We'll see you in a bit.